Well, hey, coronavirus time. It's another lecture. Such an exciting thing. It's like something new. It's like Christmas every day you open these same things. Or Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, maybe the Festivus for the rest of us, depending on how you want to. Anyways, let's get on to our thing. This is the foreign policy level of the 1800s going into then the early 1900s. And it's going to be the kind of foundational laying of what will then jump America into World War I and World War II. So this is kind of us becoming an industrial power. Next thing you know, we need a lot of stuff. So this is gonna be where we kind of start to become a big boy, and we get invited to the big country's table, and we get to sit and have like the mashed potatoes before everyone else has all messed it up. So this is where we're gonna get a chance to kind of move our way into the game of the rest of this time period. Now, like everything else, it has to be explained with the context of what came before it. So we have an industrial revolution that is mass producing things all over the place. And let's just say, for example, Andrew Carnegie's steel production. So you have steel production happening in England first. And it's based on a whole lot of things that you need, but it's happening in the United States too, following afterwards, but it's happening at the same time. Now let's imagine in England, let's just say, pick a decade, 1870. And then the United States in 1870. We're just baby stepping into steel production. Andrew Carnegie's just starting to get his hands on the idea of what to do with it. Well, England's already been there first, so they're getting better at it, producing more steel. We then produce more steel. Then England continues to press more steel, and we start catching up a little bit. Next thing you know, we're doing pretty damn well, and we're making a heck of a lot of steel by let's say 1900 or so. 70, 80, 90, 1900, 1910, whatever you want to do. It's just don't get too wrapped around the dates. We start passing up England around the turn of the century, the beginning part of the 1900s. All right, we got more people, we got more land, we got more natural resources. But as we mass produce steel, it also means we mass consume the stuff that goes into making steel. Coal, iron ore, coke. Not the kind you drink like this, but the idea of mass producing something comes with the expectation that you understand that you're going to mass consume the natural resources. If you used to make a pair of shoes by hand an hour, you might not eat up an entire cow's worth of leather within a week or two. You start producing 600 pairs of shoes an hour coming off assembly lines, you're going to have a lot of cows going out to the slaughterhouse to be able to create the leather that you need for those shoes. So one of the elements to just remind yourself in terms of this comparison with England and France and all these others is while we're all these European nations, the United States going through the Industrial Revolution, what that means is that we're all mass consuming our natural resources. That's going to be part of the problem when it comes to England. It's iron ore production doesn't have as much. So they're trying to produce, they're buying a lot of it from overseas, but after a while, England might start kind of running out of its iron ore. And the United States might still be making all kinds of iron ore. So what happens in this Industrial Revolution, if you're an AP Euro, is one of the things that causes Europe to go running around the rest of the world and taking basic possession of anything that can't defend itself, called imperialism, is that they need to. We don't. The sea to shining sea, we have so much at our disposal. So many things here in the continental United States. We can just keep mining stuff all over the place. Remember, England is about, of our original 13 colonies, you could fit like 3 almost Englands in our 13 colonies. So it is not a really big place when it comes to natural resources. Now, one of the other elements we need to remind ourselves about in the Industrial Revolution is while the United States doesn't have to go racing out around the rest of the world to grab stuff, because we have more than enough of our natural resources at first, our population is growing and it's doubling about every 30 years or so. Now, under ideal circumstances, your gross domestic product, GDP, would be producing stuff. Now, if you produce less stuff than your population needs, let's say, for example, that green circle is within the blue circle, let's just say, then you're going to have to export nothing and import a whole bunch of stuff to make up the actual difference between that green circle and the blue circle. So ideally what you have is a population where your actual production matches your population's needs. That would be an ideal system, the dream of all mercantilists. I, as a country, make all the stuff my people need, and we never have to spend any money to buy from outside of ourselves. Now, ideally, you start to make more than your country needs, so then you can start to export out and bring money back home. That's all wonderful and good, except we're also talking about the time where tariffs are reigning and we have tariff wars all over the place. And so as America gets better at making stuff, more than America needs, so that's what America needs in that little blue line, and now we're making more than we need. Next thing you know, we have to start to have markets. We have to have people buy our excess stuff. Because if we can't sell that excess stuff, that stuff beyond our population needs, then factories are going to start to shut down. They're going to start to lay people off. Next thing you know, the country goes into depression. So one of the things you really have to keep in the back of your head, I guess at the side of your head, the back of your head is this idea that what drives America in the age of European imperialism is not a need for natural resources. We have our hands on almost everything except for sugar. That's like the one thing we can't get a hold of very much. But other than that, we have more than we need in the 1890s going 1900s. But Americans don't buy all the stuff coming off the American factories, meaning never-ending economic recession or depression. 1893, the worst we'd ever seen up to that time period. So what drives America in the age of imperialism is our need to go out to the world to grab markets. We need places to sell our stuff. And when we start looking out at the world, we look out at Europe, but they're playing the tariff war game with us, and we play with them. Maybe we could sell to Latin America under the Monroe Doctrine, but they don't have a lot of money, so they don't buy a lot of our stuff. Maybe we could sell to Africa, but it's got even less money at the time period than Latin America does. But if we could sell to some place out there in the world, like maybe a fifth of the population, China, we could actually start to make all kinds of money. So our unemployment woes are going to have to start to happen differently. We're going to have to start to get our exports to China. So what we have in this time period is, if we want to export to China, where 1/5 of the population lived back then and 1/5 of the population lives right now, in this game then of imperialism, we got to remind ourselves that we have to get out to the rest of the world. Well, people were beginning to think about this at the time period. This used to be, I think it might still be, this is a more modern picture, it's pretty pixelated, so I hand painted it, so hopefully you won't be too critical of it being so bad, because I've been rushed trying to make these things. But this is what is known as the Metropolitan Club. And it had a bunch of guys in the time period who used to hang out there. One of them was Alfred Thayer Mahan, and then Thomas Platt, the boss after, basically Boss Tweed, but he's a Republican boss. That's why he's got his red there. He's the boss of the Republican Party, Senator Platt of New York, and Admiral Thomas Dewey. And he was a high-ranking admiral in the Navy, but his career kind of pooped out. We hadn't had any wars for a while, you know. And then we had Henry Cabot Lodge, not Lod, but Lodge. His name is right back there, so I can move myself a little bit. Henry Cabot Lodge, John Hay, who had been one of the best friends of, let me get like this, get over here, and then I'll get myself over that way. There we go. And then John Hay had been one of Abraham Lincoln's best friends in the time period that the Civil War, and he'd kind of gone on to be one of the main movers and shakers of the Republican Party in that era. And then eventually we end up having in this Metropolitan Club, men's club where they'd go and eat lunch, young aristocrat Teddy Roosevelt, who had been born into some old money and didn't have to work a day in his life. He didn't want to. These guys sat around and talked about global politics as the kind of stuff they loved. They were fixated with it. And one of the things they came up with was this idea of the large policy. And what the large policy meant was that when you eat lunches with a lot of money in your back pocket, you can actually get very large after a while. But actually the large policy meant, in this age of social Darwinism, remember that's the entire 1870s, 1880s, 1890s, it hits its high point. If the United States wants to be one of the big power nations in the world, it's going to have to get off its butt and start taking empire colonies like the other countries were. And so they began to kind of come up with this idea of how can we expand America's power. And Alfred Thayer Mahan, I always love saying his name, Mahan, M-H-A-A-N. Alfred Thayer Mahan was a kind of a naval strategist. And he hated being on boats, but he loved researching naval warfare and things like that. And he wrote The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. And what he in essence said is that all the great powers have always been able to project their energy out, project their power out amongst the world or their region. And the United States at the time period was needing a navy that had a steam power. The problem with steam is it is powered by coal, and coal will run out. And if you run out of coal, you're in essence like being out of gas in a car. So you need to be able to get yourself out. Well, a coal-driven ship during the time period could get about 3,000 miles before needing a refill. So if we want to trade and project our power out to China, what Alfred Thayer Mahan, in essence, and these men of the Metropolitan Club with their large policy were describing was the idea that we needed to really then start looking at the possibility of having refueling bases across the Pacific, about 8,000, 9,000 miles across, because we got that curve and everything. So we started in this time period really looking, as you can tell, we take all these little islands around the 1850s, 1880s, 1890s, 1890s. We start looking for ways to get out to the rest of the world. Well, at the same time we're doing this, we're also having problems right here in our own backyard, our Monroe Doctrine backyard. Cuba had been one of the last little colonies left of Spain, as Spain had been pooping out, having been the great power of the 1500s. They still had Puerto Rico, they still had the Philippines, but Cuba was pretty much all they had left. And the United States had, in this time period of the 1820s, remember, announced the Monroe Doctrine, meaning the Western Hemisphere is off limits. As these countries begin to get their independence, there are little baby sister republics. You got to stay away from them. Europe, they're not your colonies. So we asked for this idea of being able to be powerful and at the same time kind of a protector. Well, this has been the idea of the Western Hemisphere, the entire half of the world. This half of the world, all the way from Santa's Workshop, way up here, all the way down to the dancing penguins of Chile and Argentina, Antarctica. This is going to be our neck of the woods. So you got to stay out of our neck of the woods. So the Monroe Doctrine has been saying that for a while. And it then kind of revolves itself around the idea of manifest destiny. And we kind of take Mexico, or a good chunk of Mexico. And then all the way into 1855, remember, we were trying to find a way to get Cuba, the Austin Manifesto of 1855, where we were trying to pressure Spain into declaring war on us so that we can then come back and take Cuba, basically, just like we'd take a top third of Mexico. And that was all found out. So for those who don't know, we never actually took Cuba in this 1855 time period. But hold on, because we're going to take it here pretty soon. Cuba's been one of those things that we've just been salivating. It is the crown jewel of Spain. It makes so much money producing sugar for Spain that we've got a lot of business interest in Cuba. But man, it would be nice if it was actually ours, our 51st state or something like that. And so sugar is going to be the big moneymaker until the advent of oil in the 1890s, early 1900s, thanks to John D. Rockefeller, and then later on Henry Ford, the combustion engine, and all that kind of fun stuff. So in this time period, the United States is looking around, trying to kind of expand its power. But while we're kind of going from sea to shining sea, Europe is basically running around grabbing whatever they can. So the United States and Russia are kind of working their way around the Pacific, because that's kind of where our power structure is. China used to be the great power in the Pacific, but kind of faded out in the 900s up to the 1100s. So we, in essence, are kind of in a race. Well, one of the things we do is we take, right there, you can see it, the Sandwich Islands. You may know and love them more as our 50th state, Hawaii. So we play the game of going out in the 1860s, 1870s, 1880s, missionizing. We're basically spreading the word of Jesus around the world. We have all kinds of missionaries going around, and they are proselytizing, they're evangelizing to, in essence, the people of Hawaii who had never had Jesus really brought to them, at least not in ways that took root. So what happens is we have a bunch of kind of eat your cake and have it too, or eat your anyway, kind of a symbiotic twofer. So we have these missionaries that are bringing Jesus, but they're also bringing American investment. One of the most prolific investors in the time period was a guy by the name of Dole. Think the Dole Fruit Company. So Dole, in essence, had kind of had a way to overthrow the government, the kind of empire, the monarchy of Hawaii, proclaim itself a republic, saying, the cover story was, that it's really the Hawaiians that are doing it. It's not really us. We're not doing this. It's the Hawaiians who want our system of government. Well, President of the time period, Grover Cleveland, kind of said, that sounds a little funky. I don't think that's necessarily true, and sent some people to go investigate. And they came back and said, no, it's kind of the United States overthrew Hawaii, and they really don't want us there. So Cleveland said, nah, we're not going to do it. And then in 1896, the election happens. McKinley, who's over there on that little side over here, McKinley comes in and he basically says, we are taking Hawaii. We're going to take Hawaii because we need it for a refueling system, plus we need some sugar stuff. And so here he is kind of convincing, the United States to go marry Queen Liliuokalani, who is going to be the last empress of Hawaii, and the United States will take it over as a territory. So this is happening this time period where we have annexation of these areas that are not really wanting to be part of America, but, sometimes what you want is not what you get. Same thing's happening in Cuba. Cuba has had its own kind of liberation army, Cuba Libre, free Cuba, since the 1870s, 1860s. Actually, farther back, 1880s and the 1890s, it kind of parked up again. And so they're kind of founding fathers. They're just like our founding fathers, and they've been fighting for the independence of their people, just like we had fought for the independence of our people. Now, the United States started in the 1880s, 1890s, kind of paying attention to this. And by the mid-1890s, we're really starting to pay attention, especially when it kind of flares up in Cuba in 1895. And it's not just that we feel badly for the Cubans, but all of a sudden we start noticing that trade with the rest of the world and trade with Cuba starts going down because of all these insurgents, as they're called. You'll see this in a second, popping up. In other words, founding fathers, patriots. These are people who are in insurgency. They're beginning to overthrow the government of Spain in Cuba. That's the mindset. And we are sitting here kind of going, well, America's kind of blind to this. But America's heart and soul, Lady Liberty, Columbia, with her little revolutionary hat, her little beret, is reaching out, trying from Fortress America to help these poor little Cubans who are suffering under Spanish rule under 16th century methods. Barbarity, cruelty, assassination, murder. And you can see this insurgent basically giving up his life for the freedom of Cuba. So by the 1890s, we started talking about the idea that maybe we should go out there and help our fellow Americans, because this is all Vespucci Amerigo Vespucci Americas, from up and again the Santa's Workshop all the way down. Maybe we should go help. And what you start to have in America is this kind of drive to find a way to help. Now, William Randolph Hearst and Pulitzer are basically in a kind of a newspaper war at the time period. One of the things they started figuring out was most people are kind of bored by most normal news. So they started coming up with news that was more spectacular, like murders and sex and greed and corruption and all that kind of stuff. And they started calling themselves the Yellow Press. And the Yellow Press comes from a reference of the way that this was happening at the same time that they start to report on the trials and tribulations of these Americans, just like us, who are fighting for their freedom, just like our founding fathers, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams. And the reason it gets called the Yellow Press is we have our first colored ink being used in newspapers to kind of grab the attention of the readers, and it was called basically the Yellow Kid. And he wore this like little romper thing, dancing in champagne or whatever he's doing. And it was the first use of color. So they called it the Yellow Press. It was designed to like grab the reader's attention and make them go like, oh my God, look, that's yellow. I want to read it. So William Randolph Hearst is supposedly reported as saying, you provide the pictures, I'll provide the war, to Remington and a handful of his artists who were down there. And so the pictures America would see of the horribleness of what the Cubans were suffering under were basically drawings of what was being theoretically seen with their very own eyes, of these Cuban kind of like concentration camps where the people are starving to death. And the Spanish were doing some pretty bad atrocities, but they were in essence saying we had to because they were being fought against by these insurgents who were destroying our supplies, destroying our stuff, hurting our people. One of the most famous was this image of Spaniards searching women on American steamers. And so these Spaniards are like leering at this woman insurgent who'd been stripped naked. And they're like, let's see if she's got anything on her, shall we? Well, supposedly as real life, this woman was searched. But she then reported that she had been strip searched basically by some nuns. So theoretically, there was no ogling of men going on. But, that sells for a better thing. So we in essence have like fake news, President Trump style, but back in the 1890s. The idea of what does it do to sell? What do you need to do to sell and get people to read your stuff? So the United States sends in the USS Maine, and it blows up on February 25th, 1898. We send it down to Havana Harbor to kind of protect American interests in there. And it blows up. 250 some odd American sailors die of a crew of about 350. Most of the actual officers were enjoying themselves in Havana in the Havana Nights. But the Maine goes down. And so we have another rallying cry that's going to kind of resonate in America during the time period, just like Remember the Alamo. Now it's going to be Remember the Maine. And this idea that we've got to find a way to like avenge our sailors who went down. And very quickly, all kinds of accusations start popping up that will lead to the Spanish-American War. And as you can tell, like the newspaper here in the background, the destruction of the warship Maine was the work of an enemy. Assistant Secretary Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt, Assistant Secretary of the Navy, is convinced the explosion was an act of war. The warship was not an accident. In other words, the Spanish blew it up. Destruction of the Maine. And so Teddy Roosevelt basically starts going out all over the place as Assistant Secretary of the Navy at the time period saying, this was an act of war. This was the Spanish. They blew up our warship. Now, of course, the Spanish are saying that's not exactly what happened. It looks like the actual explosion came from the inside out. In the future, they'll actually go and re-look at it, and they found that the Maine did indeed blow up from the inside out. There was a boiler that blew up, and it ignited some of the manufactured, like ammunition, and then it blew up the ship. So theoretically, the Spanish were right, we were wrong. Later on, just as a curiosity, cousin Franklin Delano Roosevelt will follow in Uncle or Cousin Teddy's footsteps and then try to be an assistant secretary of the Navy to kind of mirror his path to the presidency, just like his cousin Teddy. And actually, we'll just sit on his lap, like a little comfortable, like little cousin saying, let's talk about bedtime stories. So what we have then in America then is this rush with this kind of like sensationalization of Spain, this brute with this knife, Maine sailors murdered by Spain in the rain. It's plain that this is insane. So we have this horrible thing. Sailors being mutilated in the United States got to do something to like avenge them. So Teddy Roosevelt screaming and yelling. McKinley finally bows to the pressure and asked Congress to declare war. And another cigarette, to declare war on April 11th. And later in this debate, one of our senators, I think it's from Colorado, Democratic Senator Henry Teller, says, hey, okay, so if we're going to declare war on Spain to free Cuba, then okay, that's fine. But we are going to free Cuba. We're not going to take it. So the Teller Amendment, you need to know the Teller Amendment, got to have the Teller Amendment. Senator Teller, in essence, is going to tell the American people and tell the rest of the world in the Teller Amendment, we are not going to take Cuba when this is all said and done. We are in this war to free Cuba, and that's it. We're not taking it. We're going to free Cuba. Teller Amendment tells it straight. And so we, in essence, get it passed. It passes with almost 300 and some odd, almost very few in the House. In the Senate, it's a little closer. And then a couple days later, on April 24th, war is declared on Spain. So we go now into the Spanish-American War, and you'll see all kinds of lithographs of the time period that show, in essence, the United States sharing and helping, like the founding fathers, the patriots of America, saving and helping the patriots. And then we have other montages of the time period. And what you'll see in this picture, if you notice, is a Southerner shaking hands of a Northerner over the issue of Cuba. America now has found itself together once again. The kind of the rendering, the ripping, the tearing apart of America in the Civil War has now been brought together because we have a common enemy, those dastardly Spanish that sunk the American warship. Well, out of this process, the United States fights for about 10 weeks or so, about 2.5 months, and we just beat the living snot out of the Spanish. They are a distinctly fading empire. They're going out, but the United States comes in and just beats the crap out of them. Now, we don't just beat them in Cuba. We also beat them over in the Philippines. So it's like a two-front war. The Philippines are their other colonies that they have left. So they have Cuba, Puerto Rico, and in essence, the Philippines. And the United States beats them all over the place. Now, Teddy Roosevelt's going to be the guy that's going to kind of come out of retirement. He'll kind of retire from the Assistant Secretary of the Navy so he can go finally be involved in the war like he always wanted to be. And he gets together a group of guys called the Rough Riders. And they're a bunch of like old Harvard and Yale but polo player guys and some cowboys he met out in Dakotas. In essence, they are going to go down, although there's not going to be enough room on the ships for their horses. So most of those guys end up just walking up the hill at San Juan Hill, Kettle Hill. But the United States beats the Spanish pretty handily, pretty quickly. Meanwhile, before all this had happened, Teddy Roosevelt had actually kind of telegraphed off to Admiral Dewey saying, as soon as I tell you, you send your ships down to Manila Bay, which is the main bay in the Philippines, and get ready to like trap the Spanish fleet there and sink them if you have to. So Admiral Dewey, George Dewey, does as he's told with these secret kind of like maneuverings of sorts. So Teddy Roosevelt, you could argue, is going to be the main architect of why we end up getting the Philippines, because he put Admiral Dewey there, blows the Spanish ships out of the water. They surrender after a pretty decent fight, not just on water, but also land with our Philippine. This is Emilio Aguinaldo. He, in essence, is the George Washington of Philippine independence, and he is able to grab the chance to save his people, to free his people. He, in essence, has been promised by George Dewey that if you help us defeat the Spanish, we will help you get your independence when all is said and done. Come to find out, George Dewey was not saying that with any national authorization from the President of the United States, President McKinley. But Admiral Dewey then indeed kind of promised to Emilio Aguinaldo, you help defeat the Spanish in the Philippines on land, because there's like 9,000 islands over there. We'll defeat the Navy to keep them getting supplies to their soldiers. The two of us will get the independence, and you can be independent. In essence, felt he had the assurance of the United States. This is going to turn out to be worse later on. But by 1898, the Paris Peace Treaty is going to end the war. You want another Paris Peace Treaty? 1763, 1783, Paris Peace Treaty, the Paris Peace Treaty of World War I. We got Paris all over, but Paris is a nice place to be. So why not sign a treaty there? So as this cartoon shows you, bam, the Spanish, or gypsies, whoever they are in essence, are being kind of forced by Uncle Sam with his kind of, total kick-ass, kind of like sailor kind of outfit right there. In essence saying, we are going to free Cuba, we're freeing Puerto Rico, we're freeing Mariana Islands, and then Manila, that's Manila, the Philippines. In other words, we're winning all over the place. And we do. We end up fighting, kicking Spain out. Spain, in essence, now has lost all their colonies except for, I think they got 2 in Africa. And the United States now is the liberator of free Cuba, thanks to the Teller Amendment. Spain has got to get out. And as this cartoon shows you, history, this kind of like Greek goddess writing down history, is wondering who or what killed Spain. And now all these people, all these European nations are like, So here's Germany, here's England, here's France. These guys are kind of like going, who and how did this happen? And Uncle Sam going like, that's right, bitches. You think that we don't have some power? You want to start talking to Spain. Figure out how the United States is going to knock people around. Well, all of a sudden now we have a problem. Because the insurgents that we fought with to free Cuba from the Spanish ended up not being all that great. At least that's what we felt. See, the United States really kind of wanted to get its hands on more investment in Cuba. So as the Spanish were leaving Cuba, since they can't have it anymore, but they had owned it, they began to sell their natural resources in Cuba, their sugar fields and mineral rights and ports and all this, to the highest bidder. And often the highest bidder was the United States. The United States ended up buying around roughly 75 to 80%, 85% of all the stuff of any worth in Cuba. Not the United States government, but the United States investors. And the insurgents weren't happy with that because, in essence, they earned their independence. They've been promised their independence, but before they could even take a breath, the stuff of their country had been bought out from underneath them. And so they start kind of getting pissed. So what you have in this little cartoon is this kind of like, save me from my friends. So here's Cuba Libre, the essence of Cuba, so that's their Lady Liberty, begging Uncle Sam to save her from the people that had fought to free her for all these time. So these insurgents, in essence, are out there getting ready to take advantage of Cuba. The Cuban people are getting ready to take advantage of Cuba. We can't let the Cuban people take advantage of Cuba. Okay, so somehow or another, this becomes an interesting process. So as this little cartoon shows you, are we going to drop now freed Cuba into the anarchy of the insurgents, or do they need a little bit of American guidance, a little help on how to become a better person? Oh, certainly we're going to give them their independence. We had agreed to that in the Teller Amendment. But before we give them independence, we then pass something called the Platt Amendment. That in essence says the Cuban people must know that it is the right of the United States to intervene in Cuba anytime we want to protect American interests on the island. Meaning, we'll send the Marines in, if we have to protect America's investments. And it's going to be the beginning of a long story that will lead ultimately to Fidel Castro in 1959 when he overthrows an American-backed dictator, Fulgencio Batista. The United States will begin to prop up a series of not very great men, but the United States investors will start to modernize Cuba for the sake of us getting profits. It's an interesting game. But we'll see that later on as we go on. So we're going to kind of brand it as part of ourselves. And that then leads to this political cartoon of American imperialism. Like all of a sudden it's like, now Uncle Sam has a chance to do I want to be a big European imperial power just like they are? Do I want to own some stuff? Sure. I could buy Cuba. I could have Puerto Rico. I could the Philippines. So many things Waiter McKinley is offering to us. And over his Lady Liberty, and her fancy European kind of military uniform with her new cool fancy European hat, world power. So America starts thinking, maybe this is pretty cool. We are a big badass power in the 1898 time period. Now, as we look around to the rest of the world, we see all these spheres of influence. And spheres of influence are pretty simple. Basically means England has got all these little colonies, and they more or less have exclusive trading rights with those colonies. Those colonies can only buy from England, or anybody England lets them buy. France has got the same situation. France has been running around the 1870s, 80s, 90s, the age of imperialism, if you remember the race for Africa, and they've got theirs. And even Portugal, teeny little Portugal's got their two little, colonies. And then you even have something like, Spain has got a couple left, Spanish Morocco. Even Denmark basically has Greenland, Iceland. And I was going to put on the Belgians, they have the Belgian Congo, but basically Europe has more or less been taking over stuff all over the place. Now, the Monroe Doctrine of the United States has kind of done a similar thing, saying this area, with the exception of the Guyana triplets, are off limits for Europe. So you guys can have that. We'll have this. So we have like internal trade control, and they've got external trade control over there. These are spheres of influence. Now, notice, if you want to play this game out a little bit, if you remember your AP Euro history from last year, Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Will of Ottoman, the blood and iron, Otto von Bismarck. Germany is a quick-growing country, but it got late to the imperialism game. So they were able to take a whole bunch of stuff over there in the South Asian seas and a little bit of the cherry-picked ideas out there, but they don't got a lot. For their power, for their actual growth, their economy, they don't got a lot. Italy, not much. They took Libya and Eritrea, and then basically Italian Somalia. Ethiopia is going to fall in 1935 because they're going to want to take that. But if you notice, even Japan, a quick and up-and-coming industrial power, having copied British and American and German industrial tactics, they were growing fast. But Japan's got about the same amount of land as England does. In the age of industrialization and mass production, if you're going to mass produce something, you're also mass using your natural resources. So just think about it from this perspective, because remember, one of the parts of your job to prove on these DBQs and these long essays, if this is a year where this is still on the internet and it's not a COVID year, is that you understand how stories work through time, the time play. Well, that's pretty much the big chunks of the world and then the Middle East that aren't being spoken for. And later on they will. And that's going to lead to basically World War II. So everyone's in a race for land. They want land. They want the imperialism. And the United States, now with the Philippines, has a chance to jump into trade with the biggest populated country in the world, 1/5 the population of the entire world. We can't really do it with India. We're another 1/5. I gotta stop it. Smoking. The spheres of influence, the United States now finds itself wanting to jump into trade with China, as this little political cartoon shows you over here. We're gonna bring education and religion all in one book. Then we're gonna bring in investment, bridges, money, things, steel, rails. And look, this Chinese man is welcoming. They want all kinds of things in the United States. Who wouldn't want what America has to sell? And Uncle Sam over here is holding the key to China and kind of saying to these European nations, you can't keep doing what you've been doing, or what they've been doing is something. Okay, now just for the sake of purpose, remember, most of these artists in the political cartoons could give a rat's ass about any AP kids in the future. If you really want to get kind of what the Philippines look like as a jumping off point, you should have turned around Uncle Sam, but I guess, maybe seeing from the top down or whatever. So what happens in this sphere of influence game with this 1/5 the population of the world is all these European nations have got their little slivers. They've got their own internal spheres of influence. And in essence, they have kind of blocked American trade in the time period by erecting a kind of a barrier of sorts. So the United States, having taken the Philippines, having a perfect place to jump off to trade with them, decides maybe, just maybe, we're going to not stand for this carving up of China anymore. So in 1899, John Hay, one of Abraham Lincoln's old best friends, announces as Secretary of State what are known as the Open Door Notes, in essence meaning, Europe, you need to treat China much more nicely. You can't keep carving her up, as that little cartoon shows. What it really meant was the United States demands that you open your doors to American trade in your sphere of influence. See, we got into China late. So you got to let our guys trade in your chunks of China. You can still have the chunk, but you're going to open the door to American trade. Now, on the global front, we in essence said China must be open to all world trade. But they're kind of behind the scenes, they're kind of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, kind of like, well, this is the least we're going to be able to establish and settle for, is the United States demanded that each of those European nations open their door to American trade. And if you don't, you better go talk to Spain and find out what the hell happens to him when you piss us off. 10 weeks, people! Defeated one of the great powers. So, in this time, the United States then pushes and gets the Open Door Notes, as this cartoon kind of shows. England starts joining us in the process, and we're going to try to open this kind of trade restrictions to these guys. And that immediately leads to then England and the United States and these other European nations deciding that they kind of want to work together, because in 1899, 1900, something called the Boxer Rebellion starts. And the Boxers were these Chinese who were so frustrated and pissed that this once great global power had been kind of just completely destroyed and picked apart by all these vulture-like European nations coming in and just taking the actual wealth of China out of China, that they rose up. And one of the reasons they're called boxers is that they had these kind of ceremonial poses that they would go through kind of in meditation / Confucius type stuff, and they look like boxers to Americans. So here then is Lady Liberty, now all decked up for war again, in essence saying, we have to protect the people of China from their own insurgents. Seems like I've heard this story before. Protect Cuba from the Cubans. Protect China from the Chinese. To investigate this someplace. So here you have McKinley walking arm in arm with the flag with Uncle Sam, basically telling the boxers to stop killing. God, I never cough until I talk this long. Killing all the people of China, including this little American looking like baby down here. Anyways, so what we have then is this Boxer Rebellion where we're going to have the Philippines. We are going to have Uncle Sam helping the people, the children of Asia, and we're going to demand that this Boxer Rebellion be put down. So America actually sends in its armed forces, not a ton, but we work in conjunction with European powers, and we put down the Boxer Rebellion. This will be remembered by the Chinese people for a long time. The idea that the Americans and the Europeans weren't really helping China for the sake of Chinese, but we wanted to be able to continue our lucrative trade policies with them and get this up. So this is an actual picture of the boxers themselves being executed after the United States and Britain and France had come in and kind of put down. So here then is a man being caught right as his head being chopped off. If you don't want to look at that, don't, but here's another person who's already gone through the process. So the Boxer Rebellion will be pretty brutally put down, and this is going to be part of a cartoon I'll show you later on. This is William Jennings Bryan, so this is obviously a Republican cartoon, political fanaticism. He's going to he's going to kill the donkey on his free silver box again. So here, in essence, is the American factory worker with his In-N-Out hat, in essence saying to the Democrats, you're not going to convince us, we're going to stand tall with the Republicans and all this economic growth. So this little cartoon, which is also badly digitized, then shows kind of the elements of American imperialism as we kind of see it by the 1900 time period. Uncle Sam is offering to the former colonies of Spain and various Pacific islands, you can either have education or you can have America's military. Or, if you want to interpret it a little bit different, we're going to bring you education and protection from those dastardly Europeans that are trying to take you over, or maybe even, your own people. So this then becomes part of this cartoon. Prosperity, plum pudding, and so we have reciprocity. And so here are these Pacific Islanders, and notice that they're all being drawn very much like black people of Africa at the time period, but that's a little bit of the racism. Here's Uncle Sam with the Philippines, the Ladrones Islands, Cuba's up here, Hawaii's over here, Puerto Rico, and so now we have husband and wife, because it's a very wonderful Victorian age of the time period where we have all our Victorian morality, and then in essence serving these lesser people. And do face of the Thanksgiving dinner table. And Uncle Sam saying to himself, these little shavers seem to like it here. I wonder had I better keep them all in the family. In other words, they seem to want to be part of the American empire. I mean, I'm not prone to taking people, but if they want to be here, who am I to say no? So we have then this kind of cartoon of the time period. American imperialism is beginning to be seen as a good thing. Here's McKinley sizing up America for a new pair of breeches, a new pair. So we have on our stripes, Texas, Louisiana Purchase, Alaska, Florida, California, Hawaii, Puerto Rico. And here are these old shysters, these kind of anti-imperialists going, anti-imperialism, come on, take a dose of my anti-imperialism policy. And in essence, Uncle Sam saying, no, I think I'm fine with this new kind of world power of sorts. So this is American imperialism. You can see 1783, our little baby. 1803 Louisiana Purchase, now we're strapping little kind of young tweener, and then by 1819 we're ironically old man with a very small body, but as we grow in 1898, 1861, all of a sudden 1899, United States now has become a great power, and look, all these other countries are welcoming us to the club, and they want to trade with our great white fleet. Having defeated Spain so quickly, the United States now takes on a leadership in imperialism and running the rest of the world. Now, as you can tell in this little cartoon, here's England, John Bull, and he's bringing up parts of China and India and all these other colonies they have, and they're working up over sidestepping cruelty and slavery and cannibalism. Cannibalism, everybody eats themselves. Slavery, all the way up to this new civilization at the peak of the top. And here's Uncle Sam with the Red Cross, and he's also helping out Cuba and all these. Man, the racism is pretty rampant in these cartoons, but he's walking up hollowers. He's carrying them, these two best buddies who used to be mortal enemies in the War of 1812 and the American Revolution before that. Now we're best friends. Just watch any James Bond movie, you can tell we're best friends with England. And we're carrying these lesser nations up to the pinnacle of civilization. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the white man's burden, Rudyard Kipling. The idea that we don't want to do this, but God has insisted that we help these lesser people out. What that meant for the Philippines is they weren't going to get their independence. So by 1900, President McKinley decided that the Filipinos were not going to be given their independence. Part of the problem was not just that we didn't want to give them their independence, but quite honestly, Germany was lurking out there ready to take them if we didn't take them. So Emilio Aguinaldo, all of a sudden, in essence, was not told, but he figured this out pretty quick. I'm not going to get independence. We're not going to get independence. I won't be able to be the George Washington. So he starts to rise up against Americans. And so this then is a cartoon showing Emilio Aguinaldo as a dictator of the actual Filipino people and the United States coming in to save the Filipinos from the Filipinos. God, it seems like I've heard that before. Save the Filipinos from the Filipinos. Save the Cubans from the Cubans. Save the Chinese from the Chinese. Anyways, again, later when I have more time, I'll kind of look into this. But the idea is that we're going to save them from themselves. And in his speech that Senator Platt, one of the high-ranking Republicans of the time period, says, I believe the back of it all, in other words, the Spanish-American War and our freeing/taking of the Philippines, was the hand of Providence, God himself. I believe that the hand of God brought about the conditions which we must either accept or be recreant to duty. I believe that those conditions were part of the great development of the great force of Christian civilization on earth. I believe the same force was behind our ships in Manila Bay that was behind the landing of the Pilgrims on Plymouth Rock. This is all God's will. God wants us to save the Filipinos from the Filipinos and bring them Jesus, even though they've been introduced to Jesus by the Spanish years, hundreds, centuries before. Anyways, I believe that we have been chosen to carry forward a great work of uplifting humanity on earth. We don't want the Philippines. We just have to help the Filipinos out. And Reverend A.B. Leonard in the Prospective Mission Fields, also writing when we're talking about whether or not we should keep the Philippines, take the Philippines. An overruling providence, God has thrust us out into the uttermost parts of the earth, there to break the power of the Spanish despotism. You know, those damn Catholics are nothing but Satanists. But we do know that the great opportunities are suddenly opened before the Christian church for advancing among the long oppressed peoples of the kingdom of God. The Christian church must follow the army. In other words, we got to bring them Jesus. Again, they've had Jesus for hundreds of years since the Spanish took them over. Throughout the war for this Philippine insurrection, where the Filipinos are actually fighting for their independence, and we're saying, no, you're going to be part of the United States. It was a pretty atrocious war. We sent in tens of thousands of soldiers and ultimately ended up killing about 100,000 Filipinos, maybe 150,000. I've seen some reports up as high as 200,000, but it was like the Vietnam War before the Vietnam War. It was pretty brutal, amazingly brutal. Throughout the war, American soldiers would write home about the atrocities committed by American forces. In these letters, some would criticize General Otis and the United States military. When these letters reached anti-imperialist newspaper editors, the letters would become national news, which would force the United War Department to investigate. Two such letters included. Soldier from New York, town of Tetia was surrendered to us by a few days ago, and 2 companies occupied the same. Last night, one of our boys was found shot and his stomach cut open. Immediately, orders were received from General Wheaton to burn the town and kill every native in sight, which was done to a finish. About 1,000 men, women, and children were reported killed. I'm probably growing hard-hearted, for I am in my glory when I can sight my gun on some dark skin and pull the trigger. Letter home. Another one, Corporal Sam Gillis. We make everyone get into this house by 7 p.m., and we only tell a man once. If he refuses, we shoot him. We killed over 300 natives the first night. They tried to set the town on fire. If they fire a shot from the house, we burn the house down and every house near it and shoot the natives, so they're pretty quiet in the town now. General Otis' investigation of the contents of the letter consisted of sending a copy of them to the author's superior and having him force the author to write a retraction. When a soldier refused to do so, as Private Charles Brenner of the Kansas Regiment did, he was court-martialed and sent to jail. Yay. Saving the Filipinos from the Filipinos. You know they want us to be there. Well, in the midst of this, Mark Twain became one of these anti-imperialists. I'm an anti-imperialist. I'm opposed to having the eagle put its talons on any other land. True, we have crushed and deceived and confiding people. We have turned against the weak and the friendless who trusted us, the Filipinos being promised independence. We've stand out a just and intelligent, well-ordered republic, and we have stabbed an ally in the back and slapped the face of a guest. We have bought a shadow from the enemy that had it to sell. We've robbed a trusting friend of his land and his liberty, and we invited clean young men to shoulder a discredited musket and do bandits' work under a flag, which bandits have accused, and I can't see it because it's right underneath my little thing that says I can turn this thing off or not, debauched America's honors. Well, in the annexation debates in the Senate, controlled by the Republicans at the time period, on whether or not we should take the Philippines, the actual chairman was a senator from Indiana called Albert Beveridge, and Albert Beveridge was the guy in charge of the committee deciding whether or not to take the Philippines, or do we give them back to the Filipinos? What do we do? And in the midst of this, he was countered in the discussion debate by a Democratic senator from South Carolina, a guy by the name of Benjamin Pitchfork Tillman. Benjamin Pitchfork Tillman from South Carolina had been called Benjamin Pitchfork Tillman because at one time he had actually announced on the Senate floor that he would shove a pitchfork up the ass of Grover Cleveland if he didn't release some funds for the actual starving, struggling farmers of his land. Anyways, in the midst of this debate over whether or not we should take the Philippines or give them back, Senator Benjamin Pitchfork Tillman basically said, so when we take the Philippines, we, in essence, are going to have it as a U.S. territory. Am I correct? And Albert Beveridge, in essence, says, yes, there'll be a U.S. territory. No, Tillman said, if you don't get from my fabulous accent. Let me clarify this. When a territory of the United States is a territory, they have the right to become a state once they reach the population threshold of the least populated states of these United States. And I believe that is Delaware. Am I true? Albert Beveridge, in essence, supposedly laughed a little bit, saying, that has been the policy of the United States. So, Benjamin Pitchfork Tillman went on, am I to believe that then these Filipinos will be able to become American citizens because they have a population vastly superior to the least populated states? I believe they're more populated than all, or any of our United States. So will they become American citizens? Supposedly, as the story went, there was a rumble of laughter in the actual committee hearing, and Albert Beveridge, in essence, said, no, of course not. Well, why? Why would they never become American citizens? The territory is populated as the least populated state. And Albert Beveridge, supposedly grimacing, but still smiling, in essence, says, well, of course, they're a different race of people. To which then Benjamin Pitchfork Tillman said, I see. So if a different race of people are not worthy of being American citizens, if I'm hearing you correctly, would you Republicans apologize to the South for the 14th Amendment and the 15th that made different race of citizens into equal citizens? Are you ready to apologize for Reconstruction? Well, obviously the debate didn't kind of fumble on this. We ended up taking the Philippines. They became a territory of the United States, and they went all the way to 1946 when they finally got their independence from the United States. But the United States will prop up Ferdinand Marcos, not a great dictator, well, a great dictator, but not a really good friend of democracy until his overthrow in 1980 or so. Well, when it comes to Puerto Rico, the last of these little colonies, Puerto Rico is itself an interesting story. Puerto Rico is a teeny little rich port. Teeny tiny little rich port. Puerto Rico is not very big. Teeny tiny little rich port for the most part. But Puerto Rico, if you kind of smooshed it in there, would be about that size compared to Texas. Teeny tiny little place. But ironically, it's still a territory of the United States. Puerto Rico, as of the 2010 census, had about 3,700,000 people in it. Oh, by the way, all of these states, existing states, had less than the 2010 census. Wyoming, Washington, D.C., which is not a state, but they'd get 3 electors in the Electoral College. Vermont, North Dakota, Alaska, South Dakota. Combined, those 5 small states in the Washington, D.C. had fewer people than Puerto Rico had. Yet Puerto Rico is not able to be a state. And these guys are, except for Washington, D.C., obviously. Actually, Puerto Rico has more people living in Puerto Rico than about 20 of the other states. And yet, Puerto Rico still is not allowed to be a state. Now, depending on who you hear, Puerto Rico is actually larger than 21 states. But the problem is, ever since 1911, we've locked in the House of Representatives at 435, meaning if one state gains an elector, another state's going to have to lose it. We don't just keep adding them anymore since 1911. So if Puerto Rico's got enough people in it that it would get 5 House of Reps, who loses the 5? What 5 states are going to lose one? Puerto Rico's still not a state. Its people are American citizens, kind of, sort of, but they can't vote for president. They have no senators. They have no congressmen. And we tell ourselves it's because the Puerto Ricans don't really want to be a state. They like being Anyways, America will come out of this time period with this imperialistic power, as this political cartoon shows, of us kind of Uncle Sam telling these people what they should do. Here are all the white people studying and doing wonderful in class, and here are these rowdy kids up in front, the Philippines, Hawaii, Puerto Rico, Cuba, and they're not. Like, got to learn their lessons about liberty. Our little black student over here is allowed to be in school, but he's not allowed to take part in school. And then we have our Native American who's still obviously so not intelligent, he can't even hold the book up right. And look who's not allowed in the school. Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882. So in essence, we have then, this moves America's imperialism into the progressive. Now, we're going to come back to the progressive era in our next lecture, but let's just talk about basic foreign policy of the progressive era. Teddy Roosevelt is going to focus himself on what is known as gunboat diplomacy, the idea that the United States is going to throw its weight around a little bit. And we're going to have something called the Great White Fleet. We're going to kind of show it off, kind of remind people, hey, we defeated the Spanish in 2.5 months. Big Bill Taft, William Howard Taft, was more of a baby. He liked what was known as dollar diplomacy. In essence, we're going to kind of bribe or prop up dictators in Latin America. We don't need to send the military in. We just got to have those guys work with us. And then eventually we're going to have Woodrow Wilson, elected in 1912, and he's going to have what is known as moral diplomacy. And he's going to be the idea of trying to like send America's kind of mindset, the idea of Declaration of Independence and Liberty. And we're going to kind of like stand for that in this time period. Well, Teddy Roosevelt is going to extend the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine of the time period had this idea that America controls this Western Hemisphere. And pretty much in concentric circles, the closer you were to America, the more America kind of messed with your actual running of your country. Most southern countries, Argentina, Chile, really don't hear much of us until the 1960s, 70s. And we'll talk about that when we get way later on. But this was known as economic imperialism. In other words, American investing companies would go in and lock down, buy up natural resources. For example, United Fruit, we'll talk about them later on. It's an American company like Dole. It's a fruit company, and it will buy up like half of all the actual arable land in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador, and we'll, in essence, grow bananas there. Chiquita bananas. Chiquita banana is going to be grown in that area. So economic imperialism is where the United States investors, not the government itself, go in, buy up land, buy up natural resources, buy up businesses, and then they work hand in hand with the actual ruling elite of those countries to help them stay in power by helping us stay rich. And that is, in essence, economic imperialism. It's not as if we have to take a country over old European style with armies and leave armies there. We'll just invest in their country and work with their government. Now, in this time period then of economic imperialism, it's important to remember this idea of spheres of influence, and that is America's sphere of influence. The Monroe Doctrine, Monroe Doctrine, Monroe Doctrine, Monroe Doctrine of 1823 you need to know, but it really doesn't kick into gear until the 1890s in this time period. Well, there's my dog again. So this cartoon shows Uncle Sam as this big kind of talking the block, this rooster out there telling the European nations, you got to stay out of our area. And they, in essence, are going to allow these little European nations to kind of fight amongst themselves one way or another. So the Monroe Doctrine is going to then have a corollary added to it called the Roosevelt Corollary. In essence, the United States will become the policeman. If Latin American countries seem to go defunct and don't have the ability to pay their European investors, these European countries can't come in and invade. We'll collect your money for you. So that's part of the Roosevelt Corollary, and it happens really when England, in essence, is owed a lot of money from their investments in Santo Domingo, the Republic of Santo Domingo, and they don't pay. So Roosevelt basically says, you got to stay out, we'll collect your money for you. So the United States uses its big stick policy, its gunboat diplomacy, to more or less make sure that the Roosevelt Corollary is enforced, and that is, nobody in Europe, you can't send armies into Latin America. We will collect your money for you if you want us to. He then uses his Great White Fleet and sails around the world and shows off America's might, reminds everybody we kicked the crap out of Spain in 2.5 months. The problem with the Great White Fleet is when you have an Atlantic Ocean Navy and a Pacific Ocean Navy, it takes a long time to get around there. It takes a couple months to get your Navy around to the other side. So we start thinking, there's a skinny little part right there. Wouldn't it be kind of cool if we found a way to get like a canal cut across that skinny little part? And just think what we could do. We could, instead of going around, we could kind of shave off 2-3 weeks if we needed to. If it's really bad weather, maybe an entire month. So the United States starts looking at the Panama Canal in this era. But the problem with the Panama Canal is Panama is actually a state of the country, the sovereign, independent country of Colombia that has a couple of other states. The Extras, the Departamento, Rural. In other words, Colombia owns its own little Florida kind of peninsula just over there on that side. It's called Panama. So the United States starts going, maybe we can work with Colombia and we'll buy from them the right to put a canal across this little chunk, and we're going to use these little lakes, so we only have to cut a canal across this part, kind of like the Erie Canal, but just Panama style. So here then becomes the idea, we're going to cut our canal across this area. The problem is you got to ironically go east to go west, or vice versa. The canal actually makes you go this way, so in case you ever want to like win a Trivial Pursuit kind of a thing, you actually have to go east to go west, or west to go east on the Panama Canal. Well, the United States offers to buy this land from Colombia, and Colombia more or less says nope. Eventually, Teddy Roosevelt gets all pissed, and this guy, a guy by the name of Philippe Bonnot, who is a French engineer, who more or less helps convince Teddy Roosevelt, hey, Panama is ready to overthrow the government of Colombia. So the United States in 1903 supports a revolution in Colombia/Panama, and within the same day, November 3rd, we declared that Panama is one of our great friends. We just happen to have our Navy right there, so Colombia can't basically go and put down the revolution. Imagine if England would have done that with the 11 Confederate states and instantaneously said, they're our friends, we're never going to let them be. So Colombia's pissed, they're pissed, we're pissed, but basically Panama gives us the canal. We'll hold it all the way till Jimmy Carter gives it back in 1999. Well, he gives it back in the 1980s, but by the time it goes to 1999, I think the Chinese are now investing in the area. But this is part of the gunboat diplomacy. Teddy Roosevelt's kind of imperialism. We'll use the United States to take over stuff like the Panama Canal, and here he is going delighted as the Panama Canal works, and the little teddy bear is looking through what can happen in the background. So this is Teddy Roosevelt with his gunboat diplomacy. We're not going to let the Colombians stop us from advancing civilization. We're going to use the Monroe Doctrine. And then again, we got Big Bill Taft coming in with his dollar diplomacy. He's going to just basically buy off a bunch of guys, give dictators basically money. Well, Woodrow Wilson comes in 1912. He's president by March 4th, 1913, and he comes in with his moral diplomacy. Well, what had happened in Mexico, our closest neighbor, is that they had an American-supported dictator called basically Porfirio Diaz, who had been dictator for a very long time. And in 1910, Mexico had its revolution. They get independence from themselves and their own dictator, and it's called the Madero Revolt. And if you were in IB history class, we would study this for like a week. But all of a sudden, they have their first basically democratically elected president. Diaz, the dictator, is kicked out. He's been there since 1876, and he's allowed American companies to more or less gobble up most of the things. Like 90% of the Mexican mines are owned by American investors at the time period. So most of the wealth goes away from Mexico, goes into American businesses. Madero in 1910 helps lead a revolution, becomes the first really democratically elected president in 1911. Truly democratically elected president. Puts together a group of people, including his right-hand man who's going to try to help protect him. Huerta, he's over here someplace. This is another different guy, Carranza. So in essence, in this time period, Madero kicks the United States investors out. And he has his Huerta bodyguard, the guy in charge of the army, more or less helping protect him. And Huerta, in 1913, right before Woodrow Wilson becomes president, is told by the United States ambassador, Henry Lane Wilson, hey, you can't really kick out American investors. President Taft would like me to know that, if Madero was gone and you happen to become president, we would find it helpful to help you. And in 1913, right before Woodrow Wilson becomes president, the United States ambassador to Mexico helps start a counter-revolution in which ultimately Madero is going to be found dead as an enemy of the people. Once again, we're going to save Mexico from the Mexicans. Huerta now is a dictator, right, as Wilson becomes president. In essence, will allow American investors to come right back in, and we'll go back to where we were. We'll actually own everything, and everybody will be happy once again. Except for Woodrow Wilson, who will now be really pissed that this is what's been going on in America's name. And he, in essence, says, we're going to go in and help anybody. Carranza, Zapata, Villa, we're going to help anybody who's going to help overthrow this dictator. Well, Pancho Villa ends up becoming one of our really good friends for a while. Zapata is for a bit, but then he gets a little too liberal for our taste. So we eventually end up, Wilson says, I'm going to help Carranza. Well, that ends up all kinds of hell breaks loose. Huerta is told that you're not going to be allowed to be the dictator of Mexico. We're going to see somebody else. So we're going to help a counter revolution in Mexico. The United States then sends money and support to Carranza, Pancho Villa, Zapata, and eventually we end up stumbling ourselves. To keep America in the mix, the United States ends up invading the port city of Veracruz, which was the exact same place in the Mexican-American War that Winfield Scott invaded right before Mexico fell. So for the Mexicans, we in essence did something stupid. In order to protect the Mexicans from their own dictator and give Mexico back to the Mexicans in the right way this time, Woodrow Wilson stupidly invades the sore spot. By sending American troops into Veracruz for Mexicans, this in essence would be the same as if we all of a sudden saw like the Twin Towers come down, only to have the Twin Towers come down again. So, well, the Freedom Tower. So for Mexicans, the invasion of Veracruz really pisses them off and starts basically getting everyone united against one thing, the United States. So Pancho Villa, who used to be our friend, now starts attacking Americans, actually invades the United States, shoots up a town and kills some American engineers on a railroad car. That then turns him from being a friend of America to now being the outlaw of America, and we start chasing him all over hell and back with the United States Army. Uncle Sam's pissed. This is happening in 1913, 14, 15. If you notice, this is happening while World War I is starting. And so we send in Blackjack Pershing to catch him. Blackjack Pershing, the nickname Blackjack he was a commander of a black regiment at the time period. That wasn't a great nickname, but it kind of stuck. And the idea of doughboys are his soldiers, his African-American soldiers that are basically out there chasing Pancho Villa in the deserts of Mexico and getting all kinds of dust on them. They look like a bunch of guys working in a bake shop. Thus the nickname doughboys. That's the nickname of World War I soldiers going to be kind of brought about. So this is all happening. America, in essence, is going to get incredibly involved in Latin America. We will send in the Marines over and over and over again to support America's economic investments in the era. Very rarely do we send them in to basically just help the American people out. Well, this is all happening during World War I start. So for those of you who remember, the United States will get involved in World War I when the Zimmerman telegram becomes known in 1917. And it's a coded message right there, as you'll see. In essence, this is where Germany talks to Mexico and says, hey, we'll work together. If you guys fight the United States, keep them busy, we'll give you back parts of what they were taking from you. And this, in essence, is the start of the American involvement in World War I. And it's connected to our imperialism leading through this time period. All right, so that's it for the day. A long essay, but still shorter than if we were in class. Next time around, we're going to talk about the Progressive Era. And believe me, you'll be excited more than you are right now.